And we were watching this video at this conference of these lesbian bonobo monkeys. I felt I was watching animal porn. I was quite kind of going, in a room full of family therapists, many of whom are practicing Christians. It was a very awkward experience, but also another exercise in radical respect.
We record this podcast on Gadigal land in Sydney and pay our respects to all First Nations elders, healers, and storytellers. As therapists, we recognise the wisdom that lives in land, body, and spirit, as well as the queerness that runs through nature's veins. This always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to another episode of Gestalt Me Gently. I'm Dabaco Matt, and I'm here with my lovely queer Gestalt colleague, Matthew Bergen. And we have a special guest with us today who I'm really excited to introduce in just a moment. But as is customary with the beginning of the podcast, we're going to do a phenomenology check-in and see how we're both arriving in our bodies. Matthew, you want to kick us off? How are you feeling in this moment?
Oh, cool. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you again. I'm sitting in my body today with a sense of support from my chair. I've got two nice cushions under my butt cheeks, giving me kind of a nice support there. And yeah, my back is leaning into this chair, so I feel supported by the chair and environment. So body's kind of tingly. I ran around a little this morning, got a little bit of a charge in my body, and looking forward to this next session. How about you, Dabaco? How are you resting in your phenomenology?
I am noticing some kind of tingles in the front of my chest, wanting me to lean forward, lean even closer into you and our beautiful Zoom connection, Matt. And yeah, I noticed a little bit of lightness in my jaw as well as I'm waking up my mouth. And also I interpret that as a bit of an excitement for the chat that we're about to step into as well.
Wonderful.
So if this is the first time you're joining us, Gestalt Me Gently is a podcast all about Gestalt therapy, its intersections with queer identity, and sometimes we also bring in what's happening in the cultural zeitgeist as well. But today's chat, I feel like our guest is the perfect guest for this podcast. When I say intersection of Gestalt therapy and queer identity and relating, this is the name that comes to mind. Both Matthew and I also have the pleasure of working with this guest in group supervision. And yeah, our guest is trained in Gestalt therapy, also Bowen family systems, and is doing some academic research around that intersection between Gestalt therapy and queerness. It's a very warm welcome and a pleasure to introduce our guest, Rochelle Oshlack. Welcome to Gestalt Me Gently. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Dabaco and Matthew. My phenomenology is just full of delight and sparkle because I really feel both in your presence very much at home with these, this intersection that, of Gestalt, which we have a shared love in, and also the identification of, being queer. And it's like a gorgeous marriage between the queer identity and Gestalt. Something very alchemic occurs.
Beautiful. And another thing that you also do so well, just to throw in a little bit of a creative nugget in there, you also DJ. And I've had the pleasure of dancing on your dance floors quite a few times and thoroughly enjoyed it. First question, let's go with a big hitter. Does being a therapist also make you a better DJ?
Well, I'm going to pull on a Gestalt pillar and talk about field theory. And I think all good DJs would know this, that it's not music selection. It's not even how you blend the songs together. It's how you read the room. And I think a skill of psychotherapy is that phenomenological tracking, really seeing how your client is moving in space and how they're relating to their space, their chair, to you, if you've got a family in the room or couples to each other. but what a joy to actually watch people moving their bodies to music on a dance floor. And then the shapes and all the in-between shapes that get made between them, if someone's hot for each other, what goes on there. And reading that room and going, okay, yeah, do people need a rest for the next track, or do they need to go higher? So I guess, yes, there's a lovely, does being a therapist, I think it's just field sensitivity, actually.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And also, dance floors are such a pillar of queer culture as well. It's where the community can gather and feel safe and express. And that's something that I have, enjoyed time and time again. No doubt I can speak for you, Matthew, that you've also thrown a few shapes on the dance floor. Am I right?
Baby, I grew up on the dance floor. When I was 6 months old, I started on the dance floor. So yes, it's been a big part of my life and still continues to be. And that wonderful thing about it being a creative space and a safe space for queers, and that's where I'm really excited. But I'm so glad we started talking music, and I'm curious, Rosh, just what does music actually mean to you? Like, yes, you just spoke beautifully about the dance floor, and reading the room phenomenologically. But I'm also curious, like in your body, in your soul, what does music do for you?
Mm, mm. Well, we're doing a podcast, we're talking words. So much of therapy and talking and dialogue, it's all words, words. And I think my soul sometimes wants to make meaning beyond words, and that's what music's for. Music can express certain emotions that, I just don't have the words for yet, or don't have the words for now, or don't want to have the words for. I want to be in this other, beyond space, and music provides that for me. Absolutely. And no, music's just, there's something about what it adds to life that is indescribable for me.
Yeah, wonderful. No, that's so good to hear. I just have wonderful memories of you DJing at one of our residentials, and it was that Fatboy Slim track Right Here, Right Now, which is a bit of an anthem, a Gestalt anthem, very phenomenological, and very much like what's it like to be on the dance floor right here, right now. And all the baby trainee Gestalties, myself included, was just going off. And what was wonderful was the light was on the ground reflecting through the forest. It was like a forest doof. And all of the bodies were like, on the shadows on the trees were like 30 feet tall. And I was like, oh my God, am I in like a parallel universe? It was the most amazing experience. So I just want to thank you for that experience.
Beautiful core memories.
Yes.
It sounds like you drank the Kool-Aid on that on that one, Matthew.
We well and certainly did drink the
Did.
Kool-Aid. Yeah, I want to, bring this from music. It actually reminds me, I was talking to a client just the other day about music as this beautiful technology to evoke and turn up the heat on certain emotions as well, unlocking sadness or anger or joy. And, it works in that beautiful plane that relies less on words and yeah, it's a different language system, I guess. And I guess I'm curious, yeah, to bring this conversation now more into the therapy room. I guess I want to transition into uh, what makes, Gestalt therapy such a good kind of marriage to explore queer identity. And I know you've been doing a bit of academic research in this area, so I'm really excited to move the conversation into this territory and just hear a bit about what your focus has been on, Rosh.
Well, I mentioned field theory and field sensitivity before when talking about music, and I think that is fundamental to Gestalt, the field theory aspect. And the delightful thing about field theory is that it doesn't exclude. And I think that non-exclusion factor really welcomes queerness. It invites it in. It says, you're welcome here. And a lot of the founding people of Gestalt, Paul Goodman, well, he's actually is the author of the text, the sort of the foundational text, Pearls, Hefferline, and Goodman text, and he is attributed for inventing or starting the word or reclaiming the word queer. And I think that inclusion piece around field theory and the inclusion of it all is very open to queerness. And I think in itself, Gestalt is queer because it's in the here and now. It's constantly changing. It's constantly questioning what's truthful, what's real, rather than what's socially constructed. And it's making the implicit explicit in that way. And I think queers make the implicit explicit. We talk to that, in queering something. We're saying, what is this really? What is this heteronormativity really? Or what is this, these social confines? What are they really? What's really going on here?
Yeah, and as you share that, I noticed there's a sense of like interrogation or bravery or courage to question, to be at that kind of the razor's edge of that here and now, not resting into the molds of society's well-worn pathways, but that kind of the consistent questioning. I noticed that aliveness, but also that sense of like you got to be a bit brave to step out of those well-worn molds or paths as well.
Yeah, brave, or you just there's is it it's interesting, that word brave, because sometimes people just have to be themselves. And they're doing it out of there's no other choice. There's no other choice. For me, there was never a choice to identify as straight. It just wasn't, that path wasn't open. I didn't see it. I missed it. If it was there ever, if there was a slight moment there, but it wasn't there for me. So I can't really, for my personal journey, I can't receive the word brave or courage. It took a lot of fight because, I came out similar to Matthew being born on the dance floor. I really did come out very, very early, pre-pubescent, and didn't even see a choice. So almost born with the queer mind, if in some way, to go, hang on, that path that everyone else is on isn't my path.
Yeah, I love that. It was like it needed to happen. Like, it doesn't sound like there was a fork in the road and I go this way or I go that way. It's like, all right, we're going the way, and there's a fight that comes with that journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There was some being a lesbian in Australia during the 80s, there was a lot of not fun aspects of that, for sure.
I resonate with that. Similar age, and as you, Rosh, and just that whole kind of really awkward period in the way in which the cultures were working their way through, gay liberation, and also the division between the lesbians and the gays and stuff like that, and there not really being a positive space in between that for other members of the LGBTQI spectrum. So yeah, I definitely kind of resonate with that. But yeah, just on that note, Rosh, like you kind of talked a little bit about being queerness, but yeah, I'm just kind of, is there like a little nugget or two that you can kind of express to yourself, what does being queer mean to you?
What does being queer mean to me?
To
I
you?
think, I think it's, let me just sort of take a breath into that. because I'm going to answer it from now. And I think just in the process of doing that, on this time of the morning, on this date, what being queer is to me is something incredibly dynamic. It makes me sort of think of quite I guess, a part of heteronormativity is this idea of the crab bucket. And I think it's comes from writings of Terry Pratchett, where even though we might identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, poly and pansexual, all of those, we're still crabs in a bucket. And there's in my lesbian bucket, I do this as well, but can often go, well, that's not very lesbian, and be pulling the crabs who are trying to scramble out of the bucket without the lid back into the bucket to say,
Right.
this is what lesbian is, and this is what being a gay man is. A gay man goes to the gym and he's, well groomed, and that's, and all the, you're all pulling each other back into the bucket to say, stay in the bucket, stay in this lane. And I think when I really lean in right now into the queerness of it, I'm actually a crab running around on the sand without a bucket.
Ooh.
And when I do get a little worried because, oh gosh, I'm a little bit unsafe out here on the sand on my own, I'll look around and see if I can see my lesbian bucket and go back in for a bit of community, or, find what my, where my tribe is, my non-binary bucket, or so I can feel I'm okay, I'm protected, I've got like-minded people, I can have a conversation with them, and they're going to see me, they're going to get me.
No.
But really, the queerness for me is the fact that I can run around without the buckets.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, no, that's really clear to me, and a wonderful metaphor in that sense. And yeah, just got a sense of that spaciousness on the sand, and that capacity to be dynamic and seeing your perspective from more directions. But then also I resonate with going back into the bucket, into the lesbian bucket, to find, I guess, what's familiar and perhaps, like you mentioned, as safe as what safety is. And then that opportunity to branch out from that. So maybe that's indicative of kind of, an evolution of queerness as well, isn't it? It's like that beyond the horizon, to that freedom to go beyond the buckets and head towards, I don't know, the horizon and what's beyond the horizon, and keep expanding that journey in some sense. So yeah, but thanks for that. I really resonate with that.
Yeah, I don't want to make the buckets wrong. I don't think,
Right.
I don't think the buckets are wrong. I think it's an awareness, and the position is to sort of helicopter above all the buckets in the sand, and to have an awareness that this is what I do. This is what I need. This is, and that capacity to do that is my queerness.
I also
Right.
love the agency of being able to move out onto the freedom of the sand and then come back into the bucket and kind of, like you said, feel that community, feel a bit more protected, but having that empowerment to titrate between those two places of expansion and then coming back in to a bit of contraction, and being in the enclosed safety of the bucket, the familiar, and what can happen if, I allow myself to explore those different spaces when I feel the capacity to do so as well.
It doesn't ghettoize. Like I feel that capacity, when we're in the lesbian bucket or in the gay man bucket, or let's say the trans bucket, it's very much about, I guess, creating identity and safety within that. But then also that concept of hovering above was really powerful for me, because it kind of says, oh, okay, like I have that opportunity to be creative and experiment, basically, and see that there's some opportunity to kind of dive into other experiences and other buckets and test the waters, so to speak. And I think that's, for me, that's a wonderful way in which existing outside of heteronormativity, that there's like this capacity to co-create life. And that's kind of juicy and exciting for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can even bring back the dance floor metaphor in this too, pour out everyone out of the buckets and just have them moving around, their claws flying around in the sun on the sand, and just we're all dancing together in the Horden, actually, just
Oh,
off we go.
Now, you recently went down to NAM, to Melbourne, to give a presentation. Matt and I are really curious to hear a bit about what you were presenting down there. Are you able to kind of distill some of that down into its essence for us and our listeners?
Yeah. Well, there was quite a bit of bucket talk down there as well.
Okay, great.
That was introduced, and I think so it was a workshop, a one-day workshop in person, which I think was the in-person bit and not just online. I think that's because so much of being queer is in the body. It's how we feel about our bodies, how we identify, an attraction. And I think the underlying theme of the whole day was attraction. To really understand what attraction is for us, what attraction is for our clients. It was run for therapists, mental health workers, people working with people in the field of sexuality and gender and relationship diversity. So that underlying theme of attraction running through, understand what attracts us, what we are attracted by, and what blocks us from sensing our own attraction. And the topic included also discussion around incels and TERFs. So we were running the full gamut of gender expression and understanding, and really trying to make that breadth of inclusion, which Gestalt does so well with its field theory, to say we're all here together. This is all of us together. And posing the question to therapists, how would you be if a client began presenting with ideas similar to incel ideas? And I don't know if we need to explain what an incel is to...
Yeah, maybe it could be handy just to define
Yeah.
those terms of incel and TERF.
Yeah. So I understand incels to be a shortening of the words involuntary celibate.
Celibate.
Celibate, thank you for that. Involuntary celibate, and it's mainly an online presence, mainly young men who have a theory that 80% of women are attracted to only 20% of men. And those 20% of men are usually, very buff, very good looking. And as an incel, women aren't, if you identify as an incel, women aren't attracted. And it comes with quite, in varying degrees of animosity towards women from these men.
And it's really in the zeitgeist at the moment because of the really popular Netflix series Adolescence. I can't remember now, but yeah, that follows, that theme of a young boy who's really angry at the world because of this belief of the 80-20 rule, and feels that he's not lovable and he's ugly and all the ripple out effects of that. So, if you haven't seen that Netflix show, I recommend checking it out to, dive into that from a more subjective experience perspective as well.
Yeah, it's quite an extraordinary show on many levels, that offering. And TERFs, I understand it's a derogatory term, and probably the most famous TERF that we are aware of is the J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter, who has quite a open and prolific stance on transgender women. And So that the TERFs they're women often identifying as feminists, which is kind of difficult in my understanding of feminism, also similar to Gestalt, as being exclusionary, but these feminists do exclude, and they exclude on what they understand biology to be, which is determined by genitals. And if you aren't born with female external genitalia, then you can't. Then you can't be called a trans woman or a woman. That's the stance on TERF. So you need to be excluded by, in sporting areas, and also there's quite a bit of legislation that's come in from this lobby group in the UK recently. Trying to think if there's anything else to say on TERFs that Matthew Dabaco, that you're aware of that adds to this conversation. I can see they do, as feminists and the feminist thread of creating safe space, that's probably their best logic in TERF. So grant them that, concerned about having a trans woman in their bathroom somehow can feel like a threat. I've never experienced a trans woman in a bathroom being a threat. My experience is something quite opposite to that. But it's an inclusion of all different viewpoints. And I think that was the practice, going back to the workshop of how all of this was introduced, is to really have an understanding of another's logic and have some compassion to it, so we can actually, for me, the pinnacle of queering is really that understanding of field theory, which is an acceptance and a non-exclusionary attitude to all, and then finding the point at which you can respectfully and radically respectfully state your difference. So that's the topic of the workshop, was beyond the binary towards radical respect. So that was the theme of that day's work. So it was a lot to pack into a day.
Such important work because of the state of the world at the moment, with this polarization and the right going further right and the left going further left, and there just seems to be this bigger and bigger divide in humanity. And I do wonder, and I also hold hope for pillars like Gestalt and queerness as soothing balms or medicine to help kind of tend to that what seems to be those parting seas that are pushing in opposite directions. But I also believe in the waves and cycles of humanity as well. And if something goes out to its extremes, I hope it's inevitable that it kind of can come back the other way. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, Rosh, about Gestalt and queering Gestalt as a kind of way to be a healing balm in this time of great polarity, in this time where incels and TERFs are really sitting at those outer edges of the polarity.
And within that, Rosh, sorry, we're loading you up. You spoke about radical respect as well, and just that concept of bracketing, how as a practitioner you might, in that sense, bracket some of these deeper, complex identities that people are carrying.
What's coming to mind are a few things. One is that how interesting it is that these, as you describe, Dabaco, these, moving away in the extremes, that how it's taking gender and sexuality with it. It's a really big discussion. We're seeing that just in I think one of the first executive orders that this current American government put into place in coming into power was against transgender individuals in that country, and transgender individuals, suddenly no longer having passports, and all sorts of rights retracted, and that came first, and it's really, I'm really curious, like why that? Why was there, in Washington, D.C., a statement in the first week of getting into power about there are only two genders? Like that was the White House's statement, there are only two genders. What is this pull towards heteronormativity about? To say there are only two genders, this is a man's role, this is a woman's role, procreation is for the sole purposes of having a child. This is what heteronormity is, especially in the church's view. And I think when you're talking, and also that, the pullback of all the diversity policies that allowed differing genders, different sexualities, different relationships to be. What is so threatening about diversity? And the answer is quite simple, and it's power. That's diversity threatens power, and it comes from the church. And I'm taking this from Professor Joan Roughgarden, who wrote this book I just have handy here, which I would always, highly recommend for an understanding around how it's called Evolution's Rainbow: Diversity, Gender and Sexuality in Nature and People. And Professor Joan Roughgarden, a trans woman biologist, discusses this in context of the church, because they will talk about, Joan talks about bonobo monkeys and how can be a fight for power with bonobo monkeys, because bonobo monkeys are quite rampant homosexuals, in both lesbians and the males of the species. And we were watching this video at this conference of these lesbian bonobo monkeys. I felt I was watching animal porn. I was quite kind of going in a room full of family therapists, many of whom are practicing Christians. It was a very awkward experience, but also another exercise in radical respect. But how the power balances when there's a straight male bonobo monkey, and monkeys don't identify, obviously, but it's what their common practice is, and they're being observed by these biologists, so you've got to take that into account, who's watching them. But when there's groups of gay male bonobo monkeys, they form allegiances that can topple power. And Professor Roughgarden spoke about this in context of the church and at the Vatican. They really, what Roughgarden's proposing is that the church is so intent on saying this heteronormativity, so the straight male at the top never gets threatened by the allegiances of the other priests forming these tight allegiances in their communities and toppling power, because that's what happens in our species when tight allegiances are formed. So it makes a lot of sense. So I think the solution and the balm, as you refer to it, Dabaco, is not only in and around queerness, not only in and around Gestalt and inclusion, but it's also Gestalt's incredible ability to, as I was mentioning before, about making the implicit explicit. And this needs to be directed towards conversations around power. So it has to happen in a systemic way, in terms of how we're really going to inject this balm, this healing power, this attitude, is teaching ourselves and practicing talking about power in Gestalt communities. And a lot of that happens in conversations about sex and eros, but talking about things that are actually quite difficult and uncomfortable to talk about. Gestalt does that really well, but power definitely being on the top of the agenda.
I love that, because I remember, in that first week of the new government in the States, them making this big point of taking the T out of the LGBTQ on all government websites. And I was so confused. I was like, what is this focus, and is this like a red herring? Is something else getting slipped through in legislation, and this is kind of like a media storm? But the way you speak about the real threat that can come from diversity to traditional power structures, it makes sense. And I also noticed there's like excitement and aliveness at the potential power that can come from diversity and, you know, unique ways of expressing gender and identity that do agitate the norms, religion, traditional society structures as well.
Diversity threatens power when you mentioned that. And in a sense, I hadn't thought of it in that context. And I can see now how that works and how that easily diminishes diversity, because it's kind of, I don't know, the fabric of our diversity is often, torn in pieces, and it's kind of like, well, how do we come together? How do we hold this safely? And, with our wonderful creative neurodivergence and stuff like that, bring that all together. And in that sense, it's given me, you just saying that, it's given me more, I guess, more opportunity to believe that to step out and beyond is actually a really radical way of bringing people together. And yeah, and that comes through music. I think house music, I think that stuff really is exciting, how house music can really kind of not preach but sing to that level of diversity. And yeah, so that creative side, finding that creative expansion. And I also am reading the book as well, and as an audible, and quite blown away by it. So only halfway through, but I also love how the book talks about the way in which nature, we're no accident. Our queerness is no accident within nature, because nature is continually throwing out ways to stay diverse, to keep the species procreating or keep the species alive. Not like a virus that, a bit like a virus. No, I'm not going to draw that parallel, because a virus is always wanting to mutate to continue building, but maybe there is some similarity in that.
This book is Evolution's Rainbow is over, I think, 15 years old or something.
Wow.
And where Professor Joan Roughgarden has gone to now is in the area of viruses, and understanding the evolutionary, and understanding the evolutionary, I guess, purpose of a virus and of cancers, and really what's going on now as our population is exploding, and looking at from that position of, where's the planet going to? Where's the Earth going to? And understanding that's why there's this kind of scramble for power. That's why there's this kind of, we all have to be like this. And if we're outside of heteronormativity, if we're outside of the two genders, then we're a pathology. Pathologies get, the marginalization of a pathology, they get dealt with by the medical profession. And then also then taking, outlawing gender affirming practice in the medical profession, then they'll get treated as insane. That's the next step, because it's illegal to perform gender affirming practice in many states in America.
I know you're also trained in Bowen family systems, and I don't know so much about that modality. But when you have kind of mentioned it in supervision sessions, it really excites me and resonates. I'm wondering, can you maybe just say a little bit about what Bowen family systems is, and if there's any kind of way that framework might apply to what we're talking about with trans identity and queerness.
Well, that's it's interesting you bring that in at that time, because where I saw Joan Roughgarden speaking in April, so a few months back, was at a Bowen Family Systems conference in Washington, D.C., where I was invited to deliver, to present a case study on a family that I've been working with for over 4 years, of a young person who transitioned gender in a family. And interesting in that too, and this might lead back to what you were asking Matthew earlier about Joan, and it also ties into the crab buckets too. Joan Roughgarden was being interviewed after a few of us spoke, and made a mention, told their coming out story as trans 30 years prior, and also said very respectfully to a room full of therapists, "You're taking yourselves too seriously. You actually think that you're talking as if you have a lot more agency in these transgender and LGBTQI communities' lives than I think in reality you actually do." Because what she understood as where she lent most in her coming out journey was community, was in these crab buckets, basically. That's really what shaped her, supported her, that area of community. And I don't think she was devaluing the work of a therapist. I mean, she turned up to a therapist workshop. She was a keynote speaker. I think she was saying that let's extend our thinking, our systems thinking, our Bowen systems thinking, because it's similar to field theory, the systems thinking of inclusion. Let's extend our thinking to include society. Let's extend our thinking to include what we can do as therapists, and Gestalt's really good at this, how we can think about forming community, because community is also powerful, and probably a lot more powerful than the one-on-one that is traditionally done in Gestalt talk therapy. So Bowen, it was a first conference of its kind. It was specifically bringing together family therapists to talk about gender and sexuality. And family therapy has its origins in the church. The first marital therapy, you'd go to the priest if you had a problem in your marriage. And so it's sprung from there, a very conservative, very heteronormative viewpoint. And really the conversation and all the writings and the books all say man and woman, all say, spouses, very little publications in the family therapy field around gender and sexual diversity and relationship diversity as well. There's always an assumption of monogamy running through it, and outside of monogamy that you've got a problem. Even if it's consensual, there's something wrong in most family therapy circles. So this was quite revolutionary for the Bowen Family Centre to do this. So it was very exciting in that way. And I think, weirdly, probably, it might be controversial for me to say, but probably leaning a little bit quicker than some of the Gestalt community do, because there isn't that much written in Gestalt literature other than queering Gestalt, and there's can be a conversation around that. The publication released 2 years ago, I think now, 2 or 3 years ago, Queering Gestalt, UK publication. And interesting, even that topic, queering Gestalt as a verb, it's saying that Gestalt needs to be queered. It's not saying it is queer. And I would have hoped it was queer, but really reading the book said, no, we need to still be actively queering Gestalt.
And I remember you named earlier in the podcast that it was Goodman, one of the OGs of the seminal text, that actually reclaimed that queer term. So, it is in the roots, but also I can I can see how they can benefit from some sustained, gentle pressure to keep on querying
Mhm.
and questioning and evolving and agitating. And yeah, that's what excites me when I introduce myself as a psychotherapist. I feel like I'm wanting to say, I'm queer affirming. I'm on this wave that is constantly, yeah, curious and questioning. And um yeah, I feel a certain responsibility as well as a new
Mm.
therapist to bring some new energy and questioning and evolution to the modality as well. It feels like it's something that's alive, that I'm feeding my little bit into the entity that is Gestalt.
I think both Tobacco you and Matthew, you're doing something here with this podcast that Rough Garden's talking about.
Mm,
Extending the wings into, extending the reach just from the one-on-one inside the therapy room. You're really walking it, walking the talk outside of the therapy room rather than clocking off and saying, well, there's my work, there my client's done. It's like,
Mm.
no, I'm a Gestalt therapist in my heart, in
Mhm.
things that I do outside of that room. In terms of building community, building ideas, having these conversations, the right here, right now conversations.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Wow. I've got something kind of good feels going on inside of me at the moment. This wonderful, robust conversation, Rosh. It really is delightful. I was just looking at The Politics of Being Queer by Paul Goodman, was written in 1969, which is, yeah, just a couple of years after I was born. So that's pretty amazing that, that word was being used in a way in this article around him defining himself within his sexuality. I did have a read of the article just yesterday, knowing that we were having this interview today. And yeah, I was just curious around him using that language of being a queer man, and that as we expand into that, it's just interesting just seeing how he bringing in the human rights movement around Black Panther movement as well. So drawing parallels at that same time around feminism and Black Panther movement and stuff like that. So quite an interesting, rewind back into a really important slice of history. Um, and just picking up on making the therapy room safe, working with queer people, I find I do a little caveat at the beginning of my sessions, which just says, you know, I want you to know that I am a queer man and I am here holding a safe space for you to bring in whatever is alive for you. And there is no judgment, there is no shame in the room here, that there is the opportunity for us to talk about whatever we want in regards to our culture, towards our body, to our diversity. So I find that little caveat gives people permission to realize is that, oh, I don't have to kind of fit this orthodox mold of what therapy would be. And it just gives them this freedom to step into that. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you might do in that regards, Rosh, as to how you create a safe space for queer people?
Mm, mm. Yeah, admittedly, I do get stuck on this word, safety. In my lived experience, I've had that word weaponized a few times by people in groups to say, I don't feel safe. And I know within Indigenous practices, they don't lean on that word safety because somehow it gives us, it's almost like an unsafe use of a word that gives up agency.
Mhm.
I like to use the word protection.
Okay.
And so what do you need for your protection? How do you protect yourself? They would be, conversations if I felt that, safety became an issue and came into the room. I know in some ways it's drawing a fine line and it's getting a bit linguistically nitpicky, if you like, on that distinction between safety and protection. But it's again weaving in the topic of power into that, and especially when considering Indigenous communities and intergenerational, the effects of colonization and that absolute ravaging of power, and that awful abuse that, that's happened in colonizing practices. I think it's more, how can I protect myself, and what do I need to be to feel protected in that? And I'm never in my own, and you spoke about bracketing, and bracketing's a really interesting one too, in terms of what our, psychotherapy governing body permits and allows. The three of us have had conversations around touch, what's appropriate and how to manage that. And it's very interesting that sometimes mechanisms of what we're thinking of as safety and safety plans, I have a watchful eye on where it crosses the line of taking away agency that you actually want a client to develop in their own way, out of their own or within their own crab bucket, where they need to take their agency. You're actually taking it away by putting it on them in a way. And to try and find that balance, especially around topics of suicide, to try and, this is a safety plan, but never taking away the agency from the actual client to develop those things for themselves, to understand and be in touch with, I'm feeling unsafe or not quite good here now, I'm feeling threatened in some way. Okay, then the question is, what are the mechanisms for you to feel protected? What can we put in place for your protection? Because I think fundamentally a lot of psychology practices aren't horizontal, and they dictate with a lot of assumption, a lot of heteronormativity assumption. I know what your safety looks like. And that's, to really queer it up, I think it's important to ask the question, what does safety look like for you?
Yeah, no, wow. Well said. Absolutely. And just that concept of horizontalization and top down, I guess. Do you want to speak to that for our listeners, what that might look like?
Yeah, well, the medical profession really fits into heteronormativity neatly because it pathologizes. Gestalt doesn't pathologize. We don't, as Gestalt therapists, say, oh, yes, you've got ADHD, you've got bipolar, and use those DSM terms. But the medical profession has and psychology included in that, has a way of sitting with, they're the expert. They know what the DSM, they're the symptoms. And there's a place for that. With a broken arm, you treat they know how to treat a broken arm. That's their expertise. So there is a place definitely for specialist knowledge in certain instances, which is very symptom focused. And Gestalt therapists are not symptom focused. We're looking at the field conditions. We're not saying you're an alcoholic. We're actually saying your whole family is an alcoholic. Your whole system around you is enabling, supporting the symptom of alcoholism. You're just carrying it. And you're carrying it because your relationship dynamics make you susceptible to it. Let's look at your relationship dynamics, so the relational aspect of Gestalt, and let's look at the system and the field around you of how that's supporting you to be the symptom carrier of the alcoholism. So that's a much more horizontal viewpoint, if you like, to say, rather than a symptom focused, I'm the expert and I'll tell you what you need to do. You got to stop drinking. And you've got to stop drinking in these 10 steps.
Yeah, I love those reframes. And just touching back on the safety piece, I think there's such a important distinction there around a sense of safety in the therapy room, because I like your use of protection, because when I really feel into it and boil it down, safety can never be guaranteed. Like, even if I bring in a bit more vulnerability or make a bid for connection, that's not a pure safe endeavor. I'm risking something. I'm putting myself out there. I could get rejected. I could get hurt. And it's always like a testing the contact and the relational field. But if I know my therapist there with their intention of protecting that, then yeah, that feels a lot more grounded, and yeah, I notice that sense of agency that I can tap into. It's not like safety can't be guaranteed. I come back to that kind of idea. So I really like the reframe, or the move more towards protection as well. That really resonated.
Mm.
Yeah, I was also sitting in, like, having raised safety as well as, like, thinking about, well, the world is really fucking unsafe in so many different ways, and I can't just, walk down the street fully safe because I might get hit by a taxi that hits the curb and knocks me down. So there's an element of risk and there's an element of danger around me continuously in that sense. So yeah, I'm just sitting in that fact that I guess the flip of safety is like what you mentioned around protection. How do I keep myself safe? And yeah, just acknowledging that I guess by stepping in and down that pathway, there's that element of how do I protect myself here and hold myself in a way that I can be in the world with agency and know that I have capacity in the world, and not fear having to be made feel safe in every environment. It is interesting because it is a bit of a click word, a buzzword, I guess, in that sense, and it is perhaps overused.
And here's the irony, and it's the delicious irony that leads us back to the beauty of Gestalt. It is chaotic and unsafe without all the crab buckets and all the crabs running around. It is, we're all bumping into each other, upsetting each other. We're all different, and how do we navigate that? And the key to feeling okay and not under constant siege and threat is talking about it. Like, it's the awareness of it. It is to say, my heart's racing right now. And then, the friend or the therapist or the community to lean in and say, oh, what else is happening? Rather than, quick, we've got to stop your heart racing. There's something wrong here. And in fact, the heart racing might mean I need to leave this. I need to get off this dance floor and actually go on to another dance floor. It might mean I need to go and, get a drink of water. It might mean it's a signal saying something, rather than this, oh, okay, I've got these really, this new SSRI that will, drop your heart rate. But the heart rate is something to, let's get curious about it. Let's talk about the heart rate going up. Let's talk about this feeling that you're calling unsafe. Let's understand it. Let's understand it further, and what information your body is telling us at the moment as well.
I feel like this is a lovely full circle moment where we've come back to the dance floor, right where we started this chat. And what a nourishing conversation it has been. Thank you, Rosh, for joining us on Gestalt Me Gently. For those that are curious about the work that you do and following, and maybe even trying a session with you, how do our listeners find you? What's the best place to read up more on your work?
So I've got a website. I think that's probably the easiest way, RochelleOshlack.com. And my when I have workshops and presentations at conferences, that always gets posted up on the website. And publications and things get posted there as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for being part of this beautiful conversation. And I look forward to continuing this journey.
Yeah, thank you for what you're doing. It's really just to live how your heart is beating. It's inspiring. So thank you for inviting me.
Yay. It's been amazing, Rosh. Thanks for being with us. And we look forward to having you back and continuing this evolving library of difference. So thank you.
Hopefully there's not too much editing there for you, Dabaco.
Not at all. And thank you all for listening. We will see you in the next episode of Gestalt Me Gently. Lots of love.
Lots of love.